How is everyone doing out there today? Thank you for joining myself, Jeff Black, Brandon DeCruz. We're back for Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Today is episode 47, Nutrient Timing and Pre-Workout Nutrition, Fueling for the Work Required. This one kind of gets muddled up out there. I know in Rice Krispie pre-workout land and so forth, but there's some nuances that we wanted to go over, and especially a really cool one about avoid training fasted, because in some context, you never know where the conversation go. But with that being said, real quick, April 22nd and 23rd, I am presenting in the Coaching Consortium. I'm talking all about iodine and copper. It's heavily referenced. I promise you it's worth its weight in gold, but it's a really good panel. I know in a future one, Brandon will be joining us, but if you guys are interested, message Jeff Sue, First Call Out Fitness on Instagram. Let him know you heard it from me. It's $349 before March 18th. But what we're going to do is something different than we might try with the PEC going forward. We're going to do all day presentation Saturday and then do one giant Q&A on Sunday for 2 to 3 hours. Let people digest, just see how it goes. Because sometimes, you're having Q&A, people haven't really thought about it. And those who are quick thinkers will usually just kind of dominate the Q&A. So we said, hey, why don't we give people a day and see what they kind of draft up and see if there's any change in product. So we're about to find the fuck out how this goes. But anyway, with that being said, B, how was your last 7 days?
No, before I go into my weekly recap, I gotta say I like that idea, but I like that this year at the PC we did 2 Q&As. So we did one after Friday night and then also one after Saturday. And we haven't done that every year in the past. So I thought that was advantageous because it allowed people to digest the first day's presenters and their presentations, ask questions specifically about them. And then also the next day, when everyone else went on the panel, it allowed people to ask specific questions tailored towards things that were brought up, but within those presentations, but as well, if they kind of like sat on things and digested them overnight, having, listened to the presentations on Friday and then coming back on Saturday and deciding that they had additional questions for the panel from Friday, they were still entitled to do so. So I think that's always a good idea when there's some lapse in terms of actually getting the information and digesting it, because we've all been a part of, online, seminars, webinars, whatever you want to call it, where you've gotten so much information and it's almost like your head's filled. And so you don't even know what to ask because you're kind of at your cognitive limit essentially. And so a lot of times, sometimes we'll see that, I've been in group settings where a lot of times you have questions, but you haven't formulated them appropriately yet because you're still digesting that information. So sometimes it does take some time. So I think that's a really good strategy for you guys to going forward and doing it in a 2-day segment where you allow people to look over their notes, digest the information that was presented to them the day prior, and then the next day come with formulated questions which they can really get the most out of their questions and out of the time that they have with the presenters.
I agree with that 100%. This is the first panel that you're going to see presented that I'm aware of with the coaches on it and a nurse practitioner. We had Megan Del Corral for joining us from Advanced Vitality. I was the one who voted to put her on the panel because I was like, this is a chance for a lot of coaches to ask questions like, well, how come I put my clients on progesterone when they have low progesterone and they still feel bad or the symptoms get worse?
They actually don't see it in the labs. That's something I often see.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm starting to just go to Dutch 100% towards women now and just be like, just do the Dutch. And then, kind of get the pathway there. But that's a whole nother conversation. We're going to get sidetracked. But nonetheless, you guys are interested in supporting myself, future Brandon, and everybody else on the teams out there because we're all just trying to help make each other better. Hit up Jeff Sue. There you go. But I'll be interested to see how it goes. So I guess if you attend, you'll be able to tell me. And if not, I'll be able to give you feedback. But how was your last 7, bro? You get ready for a vacation. You look all cleaned up. The beard looks beautifully lined. You paid like $75 at least for that.
You already know the Northeast inflation, man. But honestly, this past week has been fantastic. I'm finally starting to feel better. I appreciate everyone out there that dealt with me last week. Was able to get over the sinusy, congested, voice that I had, but I still got good information out and I got a lot of good feedback on it. So I am appreciative that it was at least still of value to those that listen to our audience. And so I'm finally starting to feel better. And tonight I actually leave for my trip to Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic. So I'm really looking forward to that. And really just this past week, I've spent, trying to get ahead on client work and making sure that all my clients are situated with any new training programs or any updates that they may need. And Here's the thing. So I really thought about this. I know you gave me some advice about this, but I left it open to my clientele. I said, listen, I'm going on vacation. You guys have the option. If you really need me, I'm always going to be there for you. And so you guys can send check-ins throughout the next week if you need so. But if not, I made sure that with a lot of my clients that I knew were finishing up a mesocycle, or they were on a deload, or they had something that we already knew I could project what they were doing in the next week or two, that I already got those updates out to them. And I did that work in advance, so that most of my clients won't need any additional help this week. So I'm really looking forward to getting away, enjoying a little time to catch up on some R&R, and just, being able to shut off my phone for a little bit and really get a reset, because, we often, what we do as a career, we pour so much into other people, and I really do love what I do, but there's times that I need to pour within myself to be able to give even more back. So, just like with my educational pursuits, I'm constantly learning more so that I could serve more. The same thing needs to happen with self-care time. So this is something that I'm really, I'm proud of myself for doing, because I'm someone that I'm a workaholic. I just work, constantly, and I love to do so. So it's not even like, I don't say this to complain or try to like put myself up on a pedestal. I really genuinely love what I do, but there are times that I need to balance it out more with enjoying life, with, making memories in a different aspect than being on my computer writing programs.
Have you ever seen this? I think I might have talked to you about this. It's it's what happened to Richard Simmons. You remember him, the Sweatins and the Oldies guy?
I do remember him, but
this
I don't remember ever having this.
Fucker made a killing, Brandon, like $86 million off one product in the 80s. In the 80s. Wow. I think it might have actually been the 70s, I say. But anyway, he literally just one day disappears, like just fucking gone. So there's this, he became a woman. There's this, he's held captive. But what it really turned out to be is the guy said, hey, for like 40 plus years, I gave everything to everybody fucking else beyond the level of beyond reproach. And I'm going to take these last few remaining years of my life and go inward to myself. Like nobody can see this guy or get a hold of him. He's completely gone. And really? I felt that 100%, because what we do, there's just sometimes I just feel like I'm like in the 12th round in Rocky. I'm just like, fuck, I'm just so tired mentally. I can't even think about myself. And I'm like, I bet that's what Richard Simmons felt like after doing it for 40 years. Cause I'm on year 18. And I'm like, okay, I could get to 30 years. But then I started thinking, like, what does year 30 really look like? Is it just me training morning clients? Is it that I have only just a few online? What does it look like to exit the rat race to some degree? So I would recommend it, because I think it would put what you're about to do in perspective of why probably breaks are needed if you definitely want to work a while. Otherwise, you're just going to become a ghost. It was really cool. So if you're listening, that's a good documentary.
I got to look into this.
No, yeah, it was like a quick 45-minute thing on Hulu. TMZ did it. So it's fire because TMZ did it. It's just outrageous.
It's probably highly exaggerated, but hey,
it's really not.
I'll do it for the entertainment value.
It really wasn't. Like I was watching it and Keegan was watching it with me and was just like looking at me and then looking at that and I was just like, yo, bro, like I get it on the level, because I started putting my phone away on Saturday and Sunday. And the only time I do messages now is when I'm shitting or if I'm waiting for a meal to cook, just because it's like, I just want that free time. You know what I mean? Just kind of away from it.
It is really nice. It's revitalizing when you do take, like, I have a date night every weekend and I shut off my phone completely. I don't look at any emails, messages, anything, social media. And for those, that 12-hour span, it's really nice. It's like you detach and you forget that aspect of the world exists. And you just go on with, life as it was, as simple as it would be, 20, 30, 40 years ago, before we had all these technological advancements and people were so accessible, or, they have you at the tip of their finger, essentially, with social media, with technology, with DMs, things like that sort. So it is really nice. So I'm looking forward to the fact that I'm going to have limited service and limited access to Wi-Fi while I'm out there.
I am glad you hopefully don't have too much access. If you're his clients and listening, give the guy a week off. But anyway, let's see. For me, my last 7 days, dude, it's been really productive. We launched the new Relentless website. We revamped it completely. I worked with Cam out of iLead on that. He did a fantastic job. Our new IT guy built it. It turned out exactly the way I wanted it. We launched the YouTube channel. So YouTube /Relentless Forever. There's going to be videos of myself, Aaron, Jason. Jason's already done quite a few demonstrational videos on like lying leg curl, T-bar row, different things like that. We're going to be doing a Q&A in my house. So if you guys got any questions you'd like for the three of us to answer, I already got one for semaglutide, overactive immune disorder, and some other ones. There'll be interesting conversations, but just kind of doing something different, man. I needed that. Social media has gotten to be kind of bleh to me, and that. And I was kind of like, well, if I could go over here and just do videos and have a good time with my friends, then it'll make it more worth it, which is why I like the podcast. I'm just hanging out with you, and then on the other one, Jeff and Jason, my friends. So, y'all are my bros. So it's easy to just show up and hang out. So I'm interested to see how it does for video for us over time. But besides that, man, I submit my book this Friday. So if you're listening to it, the book will already be submitted. I met with Steven yesterday and I was like, look, man, I just feel like I should submit it. He goes, well, why? And I was like, because I fucking hate it. And I've revised it 5 times. And what I don't know is just what I don't know. And he was like, well, it's time to submit it to your editor, because that's how you got to be. Because I guess he was waiting for me to say I hate the book. Because when you hate the book, that's the sign that you're like,
that you're ready.
That apparently he's like, that's usually a pretty good sign. He goes, when you hate it and you've just chopped it up. So perspective, Brandon, I've gone from 97 words down to 63,000.
I know. You too.
Yeah, I cleaned it. He was like, holy shit. Like, I mean, some of the things
it's like kill a part of yourself.
Like, I took 4 paragraphs, put it into one. He was like, fuck, like when he was reviewing one I did. And I was like, but it was cool. I got some good wisdoms. I'm looking at a publicist to help me and just things like that, man. So hopefully it'll be out late this year is kind of the goal and the aim, but it was the best project I've ever done for myself.
That's incredible, man. Now, has he walked you through the process? Like, you submit it to an editor. Obviously, you're going to have an editor go through this, give you feedback, give you critical, criticism, constructive criticism, things of that sort. Do you know how the process looks going from this Friday submitting to actually getting it in, published?
So they have kept this very close to the chest. And what I mean by that is they literally don't tell you the phases till you go into them. So now it's kind of just sitting back and waiting to see what they say about my draft. And then from there I go. So I don't even know I think that's so they keep you very focused.
Seems like they're keeping you on your feet.
Well, it's more like, because everybody gets in there and they're like, oh, I want to make millions of dollars. So I'm going to be like fucking Ed Milet running across stage or Grant Cardone. And they're like, no, actually you lose money. And it's really on you when you do the book to get speaking engagements. But book writing helps you get speaking engagements because you're quote unquote a published author. So they're like, it kind of like scrubs your back and da-da. I was like, all right. And they did a really good job of talking everybody off the cliff. And I've been really impressed with the process. Like I told Steven, I'm the only one he mentors, but he does talk to a lot of writer buddies. And I was like, dude, I just tell everybody I'd go to them because it's just been pretty plug and play. Anytime I need anything within 24 hours, I hear back. And from there, I'll know a lot more once I submit it. So if you're listening and you've been along for the ride, 13 months comes to a close and I now get to go on to phase 2. And then I guess after that, it's phase 3, which is marketing and all that shit. So
I think that's the exciting part.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of cool because I'm in prep, so it'll be neat for me to start documenting some stuff along the way, and all that. And I'm 20 pounds away from 154 now with 20 weeks to go as of this Friday. So I'm feeling really good about my chances of making lightweight and being skinless. And it's been good, man. I have no complaints. I'm a very lucky guy. Let's get into this topic. All right. So nutrient timing and pre-workout nutrition. Fueling for the work required. So
tell me you love that title. Come on. Give it to me.
I do. And you know why I like it? Because it immediately makes me think Milos and immediately makes me think John Meadows and a lot of these people along the way who really talked about it. And then I want to say Anthony De Pascal. Wasn't that the guy, Antonio, the scientist guy who wrote all the stuff me and you?
Mario Di Pasquale.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. I probably got people mixed up. Anyway, I read a lot. Excuse me. But
that was the anabolic diet.
Yeah, but he talked a lot about intra-workout nutrition too, if I'm not mistaken. There was some stuff that he started dabbling in it, but really it was Milos and then John and then other people that started pushing it. But what was your introduction? Let's begin like that. So my introduction to intra-workout nutrition and peri-workout nutrient time and all that was Milos. So that was me.
Yeah. So my introduction to peri-workout nutrition in and of itself was 2010 or 2011 from John Meadows. So John Meadows, prior to actually going into full-time coaching, he was a banker and I used to go to seminars with him. So I actually have been able to be out, see John present 2 or 3 times over the years and also train with him. And that's something that I really, I look back on with a lot of admiration and a lot of appreciation that I did that, because it was thousands of dollars to go see him in Ohio or to go see him in Pennsylvania or to go train with him. However, it is something that very few people can say now that he's gone. So that was my first introduction, but I was familiar with Milos. But today we're really going to cover pre-workout nutrition. So we are going to do an intra-workout nutrition and a post-workout nutrition series. However, it's just too all-encompassing. I really want to, the reason I'm focusing on fueling for the work required is because I feel like, and I encounter a lot of individuals that don't fuel themselves for their workouts. They go into training fasted. So we're really going to cover the essentiality of nutrient timing, the benefits of nutrient timing, but really from the pre-workout perspective. And that was honestly something that John was a huge advocate for, of making sure that you were well fueled and that you had, sufficient, amino acid availability, sufficient glucose availability. You had your quality carbohydrates prior to training, that you had sufficient hydration, you had electrolytes. He would always put pink salt into his cream of rice mixture, which is something that I've been doing for 10 plus years at this point. Yeah. And so he was a really big advocate of fueling for what you were going to be doing. So that's really what we're going to focus and emphasize on today.
Yeah, I remember when I trained with John a couple of times that he was real big on like that cream of rice concoction before he worked out.
Oh, it was amazing.
And to work out was high branched cyclic dextrins with EAAs with a bunch of other stuff in there. So, but my introduction was with Milos onto the whole thing, when Milos was having guys take like 100 grams of carbs during their workout with like 30 grams EAAs and 20 grams of creatine and 20. I think I actually probably actually have it in an old email brand, and the actual like what a buddy of mine gave to me who like quote unquote hired Milos, and you've seen them all over the internet, but a lot of it was based upon using the drug Humalog to be able to drive those effects. So we're not going to be talking about that one, which is a advanced one, more that one has so many nuances. It's crazy, but let's get into it. So that's kind of like our introduction to nutrient timing. We kind of came up at two different times in the industry, but they actually overlap very well. But let's give an overall consensus into introduction to nutrient timing and peri-workout nutrition. B.
Absolutely, my man. So seeing as we just finished up our two-part series on the differences between male and female clients, and we went over many of the physiological differences between sexes in things like hormones, substrate and fuel use, and fatigability and recovery from training, I figured this would be the perfect time for us to tackle one of my favorite topics, and something that you are very passionate about yourself, which is the topic of nutrient timing, and specifically pre-workout nutrition. So when we look at nutrient timing, this refers to how we allocate calories, nutrients, meals, and supplements across the course of the day in relation to our training and other activities, as well as our lifestyle and our schedule. And when it comes to nutrition, there's a hierarchy in terms of importance, which fundamentally starts with calories. Then it goes to macro composition, food quality, and micros. But how and when we specifically time the ingestion of these nutrients can improve and optimize the results we get from the exact same calorie and macro intake, as when we eat can influence how our nutrients get used, burned, or essentially oxidized and partitioned, as well as what tissues they get used by or stored in, whether that be muscle tissue or fat tissue. So nutrient timing is a more detail-oriented strategy that not everyone discusses or applies, but in my own coaching practice, I'm usually working with driven, progress-focused individuals. So my goal is to help my clients improve every aspect of their body composition, their training performance, their recovery, and their metabolic health. So if a tactic like nutrient timing can help someone, improve 5 to 10%, which is something that I've seen, I'm more than happy to get into the nuances of it, as it's worth it to me and it's also worth it to them. So using a nutrient timing strategy where we focus on getting in the right nutrients at the right time is a method that can help improve training performance, enhance recovery, maximize muscle growth during a building phase, or even help with the retention of muscle tissue during a fat loss phase or a dieting phase. It can optimize digestion and help to increase energy, focus, and cognition, which all have downstream effects on our body composition, our metabolic health, and how we feel day to day. So it's important to realize that we can only train as hard as we can recover from. And nutrition is our number one tool to fuel performance and enhance recovery, which is why we want to fuel ourselves for the work required to get the results and progress we're looking for. So the topic of nutrient timing is one that has a ton of nuance to it. So this is definitely going to be like a multiple part series, as I mentioned previously. But today we're going to specifically begin with and really focus on peri-workout nutrition and pre-workout nutrition specifically. So when we're discussing, when refer to the word or the phrase pre-workout nutrition, what I'm referring to is the nutritional approach we take in the time period around our training session. So this is going to encompass our pre-workout meal, our intra-workout, and our post-workout meal, and focuses on the fuel substrates and nutrients we provide our body with before, during, and after a training session as a way to improve our training performance, maximize our recovery capacity, improve our training adaptations, and ultimately better our body composition. And the goal of dialing in our nutritional approach during this peri-workout window is to maximize both our performance during training and recovery from training, which can yield better results in terms of muscle growth or muscle retention, depending on what phase we're in, as well as the strength development and overall training performance. So peri-workout nutrition is beneficial regardless of what phase you're in or what phase of training you're in or nutrition that you're currently in, but it can be especially helpful for those who are in a fat loss phase and in an energy deficit currently. And this is because, let's think about it. When you're in an energy deficit for an extended period of time, your levels of muscle glycogen are going to be depleted from the diet itself because you have a limited amount of substrate and energy coming into the system. And also, many of us are predominantly engaging in hypertrophy training to better our body composition. So we need to consider the fact that this type of training relies off of muscle glycogen, as resistance training is an anaerobic activity. So if we go into a session depleted, we'll notice that our performance may take a hit and our strength may drop off, which can impact our ability to maintain muscle in a cut and ultimately to improve our body composition. So my primary goal with peri-workout nutrition is to optimize the meal leading into training, as well as during and after, to fuel both the training and recovery processes. So seeing as peri-workout nutrition starts with what we consume prior to training, today's episode is going to focus entirely on pre-workout nutrition and how we can properly fuel for the work required, as well as the benefits of fueling prior to training, as well as some of the drawbacks of not consuming nutrients prior to resistance training.
Okay, so then what are the goals of using pre-workout nutrition? Like, why would you even want to consider that? Because some people, they just work and just go hit the gym.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like a lot of people don't take maybe, I don't want to say an intelligent approach, but they don't have a thought out approach to how they construct their nutrition. They're only looking at total calories across the course of the day. And whereas, yes, that's a fundamental component of nutrition, there are ways that we could leverage our nutritional timing to really benefit and aid ourselves. So this is where the pre-workout meal comes into play. So pre-workout nutrition is needed to have enough energy to perform well and to have a quality progressive training session, which provides a sufficient stimulus for us to adapt and grow from. So we want to fuel our performance rather than running off fumes, which is what many are doing when they're not sufficiently fueling themselves prior to training. So really, anytime I'm looking to design a pre-workout meal and construct a pre-training approach for a client or myself, there are several goals I'm aiming to hit within this pre-workout window. First, I want to make sure that that we're adequately fueled for what we're doing. So with the vast majority of my clients, their main form of training, and I'm sure you could say this as well, Jeff, their main form of training is resistance training, which is mostly an anaerobic activity that is glucose dependent and is fueled by carbohydrate metabolism. So I'm keeping that in mind when building out their pre-workout meals. So overall, I have a few overarching goals that I'm looking towards with the pre-workout meal. And with that, what I really want to do is I want to make sure that we have sufficient amino acid and glucose availability. We have adequate hydration, meaning fluid and electrolytes, because it's not just water alone. A lot of people get confused with what hydration really is and confuse that for just being water, not realizing that there's essential electrolytes like sodium and potassium that are involved in the process. And then we also want to ensure that we avoid GI discomfort with what we're eating prior to training. So with a pre-workout meal, I'm looking to prioritize both protein and carbohydrate intake, as the goal of the meal should be to take in a sufficient dose of protein to promote anabolism by stimulating muscle protein synthesis, and also to mitigate catabolism by minimizing muscle protein breakdown, which occurs during the process of training. And then we also want to consume carbs to fuel resistance training, seeing as it's a glucose-dependent activity. And then also there's other benefits of carbs. So carbs are also used to stabilize blood glucose, so we aren't experiencing dips in blood sugar, which can often result in lower energy levels and throw off our cognition or our concentration. And eating carbs pre-workout increase the potential for cell swelling so that we get better pumps and muscular fullness. So we not only feel better during the training session itself, but we also look better during it. So like anytime you go into the gym and you get a great pump, it's just like that reassuring feeling that you're putting in good work. And it's something that it's validating. So this is not only for the physiological benefits, but also for the psychological benefits. And when it comes to using fats pre-workout, I don't see this as something that's necessary for a pre-workout meal. However, I may add in some fats to stabilize blood sugar further, but I won't use a large amount, which could delay gastric emptying and impede digestion, as fats tend to slow down our digestion. In addition to getting in an adequate amount of protein and carbohydrates within this pre-workout meal, we also want to make sure that we're adequately hydrated with both fluids and electrolytes prior to entering the gym. Because if you actually look on the research on hydration, just a 1 to 2% decrease in our hydration levels can hinder our training performance and decrease our output. And then the last goal of our pre-workout nutrition is to decrease hunger and appetite, as being hungry prior to training can increase our perceived exertion during a session and also decrease our training performance. And there's been a large amount of recent studies that have shown the mere act of quenching hunger can improve both performance and cognitive function, which can have benefits to our training sessions and ultimately on our body composition results that we get from our training.
The next one we have is how to approach fueling prior to training. Okay. So you could take this, because I've seen it broken out a lot of ways. I see people take more carbs on the days they have like a weaker body part and they need to do more volume. I've seen some people kind of be like, hey, I have 300 grams of carbs for the day, 60% of their carbs around the pre, intra, post, of which there might be a little bit more pre. How do you approach fueling to training? And it's very client dependent, very goal dependent. But overall, what are some general guidelines to approaching fueling for training in this context?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go through some general guidelines, just given the fact that everyone's going to have a different macronutrient composition. They're going to have a different energy demand and also a different amount of calories that they can either maintain their weight on or they can fuel themselves with. So we'll go with more general guidelines onto how to approach your pre-workout nutrition in terms of hierarchical principles. So really, when it comes to fueling prior to training, I usually, first and foremost, we got to look at timing because we're talking about nutrient timing. So usually I'm aiming to have a meal or an ingestion of nutrients between 1 to 2 hours prior to a workout. And this pre-workout meal will usually include, and remember, I'm trying to hit all the goals that I spoke on in the last topic, where I'm looking at sufficient amino acid availability. I'm looking at sufficient glucose availability. I'm looking at hydration, all these other entities. So I'm trying to check off these boxes. So really, when it comes down to the principles for pre-workout nutrition, I'm going to make sure that this pre-workout meal usually includes a lean protein source like chicken or turkey, or a powder form of protein like whey protein isolate for quicker digestion, amino acid uptake. And really, regardless of whether you're using a whole food or supplemental form of protein, you want to make sure that you're at least hitting 3 grams of leucine within your meals to fully stimulate muscle protein synthesis. In addition to the protein, then I'm looking at the other parts of the meal that are going to ensure that this is a adequately balanced pre-workout nutrition meal. So in addition to that protein, I'm going to include a carb source that sits well with the client and is going to stabilize their blood sugar. So really, when it comes down to it, I tend to buy a simple low fiber carb sources in this pre-workout meal, which will break down easily and digest quickly. And due to the fact that these sources have less fiber, we can digest them quicker and easier. And it also lowers the likelihood of having any digestive distress or discomfort from that meal. So it also checks the box on we're trying to avoid or mitigate GI discomfort during this meal. And also another strategy that I really like to use is the use of 2 different carb sources within the pre-workout meal to be able to use different carb transporters in the gut. So I'll generally, pair a glucose-based carb source with fruit, which is a source of fructose, as using both of these carbs allows us to use different carb transporters, as glucose uptake happens through both GLUT4 translocators or transporters and sodium-dependent glucose transporters, whereas fructose is absorbed through GLUT5. So these are different, essentially, transporters that allow us to get glucose into a cell or fructose into a cell, and it allows for better carbohydrate absorption and digestibility. And then in addition to the carbs, I like to add in sodium to aid in carbohydrate transport. And sodium is also crucial for maintaining electrolyte levels, increasing hydration, and getting better, fuller pumps. And I often find that those who eat mostly whole food containing diets don't get a sufficient amount of sodium intake, as the majority of sodium in the American diet comes from processed foods. So I always like to add this into my clients' pre-workout meals, as sodium is the number 1 electrolyte that we lose through sweat. So if we're not repleting this or having a sufficient amount, it's going to limit our ability to contract our muscles, our ability to hydrate our muscles, get full bursting pumps, things of that sort. And then last but not least, I may potentially add in a moderate amount of fats to stabilize blood sugar more if someone is training 2 or more hours after eating their pre-workout meal. But I'm going to use a fast digesting source of fats like MCT oil or something around that. Because fats generally will slow down the digestion and the transit of other nutrients. But the good thing with MCT oil is it pretty much digests just like carbohydrates. So it's not going to delay the digestion like many other fat sources. And really when it comes down to it, these are the fundamental components, but the composition of your pre-workout meal in terms of size, macro amounts, and food source selection will depend on how long in advance you're eating this meal in comparison to the time you're going to be starting your training session. So if you're eating within, say, 30 minutes to 60 minutes prior to your workout, you're going to want to favor food sources that are faster digesting and ones that have less food volume. So you're not going into your workout feeling stuffed and like feeling bloated, essentially. However, if you're eating your pre-workout meal further away from the time you're going to start training, you can go with slower digesting carbs and some more added fats within that meal, as you're going to have more than enough time to properly digest this type of meal. And then overall, regardless of what pre-workout meal you go with, we want to check off certain boxes and hit certain goals, as I had went over previously, which is to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, stabilize blood sugar, hydrate, and optimize digestion so that we can go into a workout session well-fueled, energized, properly hydrated, and without dealing with any digestive issues or blood sugar fluctuations that can impair our training intensity, our training performance, our focus, and our attention.
I will say this big thing. I'm actually presented on this about salt. Is salt actually helps with GLUT4, like you were talking about. And if you're in a low salt environment, your GLUT4 won't be as responsive, and that's how you actually low salt environments actually contribute to insulin resistance.
It can. And also, if you think about it, in the gut we have something called sodium dependent glucose transporters. True. That means they're sodium dependent, so they need sodium to uptake in the gut into the small intestine for us to get carbohydrate availability.
Of interesting note, when I was prepping 2021, when I was putting when I was doing your steps, I was also salting the shit out of stuff. Whenever my BG started going up, I would just have more salt in the BG problem and go back down. Yeah, as I kept getting leaner. It was very funny.
What's really interesting is an old school philosophy in bodybuilding was to cut salt, cut water, and then carb load. And it doesn't work because you don't have sufficient sodium to actually transport carbohydrates into muscle cells, nor do you have the water. And remember, carbs, water follows carbs. And so a lot of times those philosophies didn't work. Whereas, I always took more of a physiology-based approach to peaking athletes, and I would be checking glucometer readings. And a lot of times when I would see blood sugar start to rise, it is because of a lack of either hydration or sodium, not due to an over influx of carbohydrates if you have loaded them properly.
100%. Why should one avoid training fasted? And when you mean training, we're talking, just so we're clear, we're talking like weight training. We're talking like,
resistance training.
Yeah, yes. We're not talking fasted walking and shit like that, which
no.
In some context, when you're fasting and you do like fasted walking, that's very helpful if you're trying to liberate visceral fat, but there's just different conditions for that. So
yeah, no, absolutely. So when it's low intensity aerobic work, I do favor it being done fasted to increase metabolic flexibility, help with fatty acid oxidation, leverage some of the supplementation you might be using, whether it's a yohimbine, an L-carnitine, a growth hormone, something like that. There are many advantages to doing low intensity cardio, which is an aerobic activity that relies off fatty acid metabolism. However, really when it comes down to the context of avoiding training fasted, we're talking about higher intensity activities. So that could be HIIT cardio, that could be your Metcon class, your CrossFit, your resistance training session. So when it comes to, especially resistance training or high intensity training, it's best to avoid going into a training session in a fasted state, because the process of resistance training involves breaking down tissue, which requires us to stimulate muscle protein synthesis to recover, adapt to our training, and ultimately build muscle as a result of the training we're doing. So we're going in there with a goal. However, you got to think about it from the physiological context. If you don't have the necessary building blocks, you're not going to be able to get the adaptation that you're looking for. So when we really look at it, some of the research has shown that taking in a sufficient dose of protein pre-training may be more important than post-training in terms of building muscle over the long term. So we want to ingest protein prior to training because we want to have elevated levels of amino acids in the blood when we train, as training causes the breakdown of muscle proteins. So having an adequate amino acid availability is beneficial to kickstart the recovery process rather than going in fasted and having to wait until you finish training to have a post-workout protein feeding. And within that, training fasted actually delays recovery. And essentially what it's doing, it's delaying both the recovery and the rebuilding process because you don't have amino acids readily available in your blood. So you have to wait after finishing your session to consume a protein source. And then you have to wait for that protein to not only digest, but then to absorb to start the process of muscle repair and recovery. And going into training fasted not only leaves you going into a session in a suboptimal state from a muscle building perspective, but it also leaves you going in where you're not optimally hydrated and you're not well fueled, as liver glycogen has been depleted overnight from the overnight fast, which can cause you to burn through your energy reserves and your fuel sources quicker. So at the very least, we want to go into training in a state of what's called hyperaminoacidemia, which is accomplished by consuming some pre-workout protein or essential amino acids. So even if you're not doing a full meal, you could just do a scoop of essential amino acids and get sufficient amino acid availability so that we're not going into training in a catabolic state, which will only be made more catabolic through training, which increases both your cortisol production, but also your protein breakdown. So if you're already going in a catabolic state, meaning you haven't fed and you haven't broken your fast overnight, you're only adding insult to injury, essentially. However, there's a lot of benefits from not only having protein pre-workout, but also including carbohydrates pre-workout in addition to that protein. So first and foremost, higher intensity activities like resistance training or even your Metcons or your CrossFit workouts. These are anaerobic activities which rely off of endogenous carbohydrate sources, meaning the glycogen stored in our muscles to fuel these activities. So if you start a training session in either a glycogen depleted state, such as if you go into training fasted during a fat loss phase or in a state of low carbohydrate availability, you can hinder your training performance and volume tolerance as a result. So the pre-workout meal is even more important when you're fasted or dieting because glycogen levels are lower in both of these states, which can decrease your performance in the gym. Another thing I don't think that a lot of people realize is that glycogen is not only specifically stored in muscle, but it's also depleted from the muscles that it was originally stored in. So for example, say that your weak points, that you're trying to work on and bring up are your chest and back. But when you go to train, you decide that you're going to train fasted because you think that there's advantages to this and you don't want to eat in the morning. So here's the thing. Every time you go into the gym and you're training, you're going in fasted. So you're essentially going into train when you're depleted. When you're training those muscles, so say you're trying to hit a higher frequency on chest and back, you're hitting them multiple times a week. It's not like your body can take glycogen that's stored in your legs and use that to fuel your chest and back workouts. So unless you have glucose present, you won't be able to train those muscles as hard and effectively. And ultimately, you won't be able to bring them up because you don't have sufficient fuel on board. And this is why anyone who's been in a fat loss phase or a prep for an extended period of time and has gotten really lean will notice that if they train fasted, they feel weaker. They aren't able to hit, their same top set performances and may lose a couple reps per set, which is where having a pre-workout meal can help mitigate this and maintain training performance, especially in a dieting state. So carbs, eaten pre-workout are especially helpful in a deficit as you're already depleted from the diet in terms of both your energy and glycogen stores. And here's the thing, we also have a large body of literature that shows the benefit of having a pre-workout meal that includes carbs and how that meal improves resistance training performance as compared to going into a session in a fasted state. So in a series of recent studies completed by a researcher named Naharuddin, they specifically looked at the impact of pre-workout feeding on decreasing appetite and increasing performance. So in the first study, which was published in 2019, they had resistance trained males come into the lab on 2 different occasions and complete the same bench and squat workout. In one occasion, they came into the lab completely fasted and only consumed water prior to their workout. In the other condition, they came into the lab fasted, but on this occasion, they consumed a high carb meal prior to their workout. Now, on both occasions, they had them do the same exact workout, which consisted of 4 sets of bench press and 4 sets of a back squat. And in all these sets, they were instructed to perform as many reps as possible. And when analyzing their performance in both occasions, they found that in the condition where they ate pre-training carbs, they completed both more reps and total volume than in the water-only condition, and that their sensations of fullness were higher and their feelings of hunger and desire to eat were lower. So then the next year, this researcher conducted another study using the same study design as the first study that we just went over. But this time, they had resistance trained subjects come into the lab on 3 occasions. So in one occasion, they came into the lab fasted and only consumed water prior to their training session. In another condition, they came into the lab fasted and were given a semi-solid carb-containing sludge as a meal prior to their training session. And in the last condition, they were given a placebo meal, which was a very low-calorie sludge made from like xanthan gum and artificially sweetened flavors to make it seem like they were consuming like what they consumed was much more calories, containing than it actually did. And after each of these three conditions, they had participants do the same workout, which consisted of the 4 sets to bench press and 4 sets of squat to failure. And in this study, they found that when they were given both the carb-containing meal and the placebo meal, it yielded both better training performances than when they trained having only consumed water. And they also measured their hunger and fullness, and hunger was suppressed and fullness was increased, similarly in both the carb condition and the placebo condition. So really what this showed was that pre-exercise nutrition enhances resistance training performance via a psychological effect, although a potential mediating role of hunger can't be discounted. So they're showing that it's not only the physiological or the psychological effect of having eaten something, but it's also that you're suppressing hunger. And so then this last year, so in 2022, the same researcher published his third pre-workout nutrition study where they had resistant trained males come in on 2 occasions. And in one occasion, they were given a carb-containing semi-solid meal that had a high viscosity prior to training session. So this was really filling, essentially. And in the other condition, they were given a low viscosity carb-containing liquid meal prior to training. So this was obviously liquid, so it was a lot less filling. And after both conditions, they tested both 4 sets of back squats and 4 sets of bench to failure. What they found in this study was despite the 2 meals containing the same amount of carbs and calories in them, the semi-solid meal led to greater feelings of fullness and lower feelings of hunger and resulted in their trainees completing 10% more reps in the squat after that condition. So in these studies, we see that the performance we find from a pre-workout meal doesn't just come from the increase in energy and carbohydrate availability, but also due to the suppression of hunger and increase in satiety. So if your goal is to build lean body mass, you want to fuel yourself to be able to do so. And building muscle is a really challenging process that requires energy availability. But if you're going into a session fasted in an energy restricted state, you're not going to signal to your body that you have enough energy on board to build actual contractile tissue. So we want to go in training in a fed, go into training fed to signal to our body that we're in a state of energy availability and abundance, and that we have ample supplies necessary to build tissue, which is why I advise to not train fasted, because this is not only something we see in the literature, but I see so many times with clients that come to me that they're having poor training sessions. They're not able to progress. They feel, really lackluster. They struggle through their workouts and they're just getting through it. It's like a means to an end because they're trying to restrict themselves prior to their training sessions and also after. And really, when it comes down to it, fat loss is about calories in, calories out, but really you should look at the timing around your nutrients. If you want to create an energy deficit within the day, do it outside of your training window when it's going to be more advantageous for creating an energy deficit, but less disadvantageous for your training.
What's your application real quick? I'm going to touch on this as we were talking about fasted. I know people are going to say it. Fasted HIIT. We talked about training. We talked about walking. People are going to ask about HIIT, running, shit like that. So we might as well just go ahead and throw something out there on it real quick.
It's going to be a matter of the intensity and the duration. So if it is a short-term HIIT training session, a couple intervals, by all means. However, if it's a really energy demanding, large amount of volume type of session, a lot of people, that comes to me doing HIIT, it's like 45 minutes or 60 minutes, which we can debate back and forth all day about it not being HIIT, but it's a really glycolytic activity. They are running through a lot of energy substrates, or they're utilizing like a class where they're doing like a HIIT training class. And within that, I'd want them to fuel for the work required. So I wouldn't advise doing that in a fasted state, because you're going to get better training performance and better recovery if you are doing an extensive amount of HIIT training, a high intensity training of any bout. Sometimes I'll have people tell me that they do HIIT like circuits, where it's like actually HIIT circuits, like in terms of actual weight training circuits, that they're doing, circuit training with very little rest, and they're utilizing explosive movements, almost like a Metcon. And they're not, fueling before that, but they wonder why they're constantly sore. They have crippling soreness, they're constantly having DOMs, and that they have impaired recovery capacity. And it's because they're not fueling themselves both pre-workout and post-workout. So I wouldn't advise that. If it's a short-term, duration, if you're doing, say, like stubborn fat protocol, where you're doing, a short amount of HIIT sprints and then doing some low intensity aerobic training after, aerobic cardio after, I don't see a real issue with that. But it's really going to be client specific, dependent on the individual themselves. And then also we have to look at the fact that there is some, this is a completely different subsect, but there is evidence from energy availability studies looking at low energy availability. And what they showed was athletes, including cyclists, that do 3 or more fasted training sessions per week in terms of like high intensity training sessions were more likely to be at a state of low energy availability. And in men, they showed a suppression of testosterone within that group. And within females, they showed a suppression of estradiol within that group. So we're seeing some hormonal perturbations from, not only fasted training, but the fact that it's creating what's called within day low energy availability, meaning that within a subsect, they're doing a lot of energy expenditure because of high intensity training when they don't have fuel on board, and it's sending a signal to their hypothalamus that they're in a state of low energy availability, which can downregulate a lot of the hormonal cascades, including thyroid production, FSH, LH, which also go downstream to testosterone, estradiol, things of that sort. So we really have to be cautious, especially with people doing high intensity work, as well as those that are lean individuals in and of themselves, or athletic individuals. If you're someone that you're really looking to push your performance, in terms of your training outcomes, you're really trying to better your body composition, you should be fueling for what you're doing. You shouldn't be just trying to go in there trying to survive.
Well said. I tell people that all the time, even my gym pop clients. I'm like, little essential amino acids, little carbs do you well.
And it doesn't have to be a calorically dense meal. It could be something as simple as, sipping on an intra workout prior to going to the gym because you're not good, you don't do well with digesting food. It could be something as simple as getting 15 to 20 grams of carbohydrates and 15 grams of essential amino acids prior to your workout, which is going to be low calorically, but it's going to provide you with sufficient fuel to fuel yourself.
Yeah, I've played around with that, and I just always tell clients, I'm like, just start small, even if it's a half of a Fairlife or half of a ready to drink or half of your own shake. Cause I know people just sometimes they always say they're not hungry, and that you have to train yourself to kind of eat to fuel, especially if you spent forever not eating. But to a lot of guys, I always say, hey, eating McDonald's before you work out is not the pre-workout nutrition of the sodium and the carbs you're seeking, because all that fat will spike your BG and keep it up, and you will just do more inflammation problems than anything you could possibly think of. So take it from a guy who did
sodium pump stuff.
Yeah, dude, trust me, working on McDonald's is unlike anything else. That's the best. That's why Palumbo loved it. But nonetheless, anyway. New research on the benefits of pre-workout nutrition for resistance training is our last point. I'm sure it shows all good shit, because as I've aged, my pre-workout, my intra, and my post-workout matter more than it ever has. Like, I can tell if I'm off by just a little bit now. So it's definitely been interesting as I've gotten older.
Absolutely. I always say attention to detail makes all the difference. And this is really like the finer nuanced details of nutrition can really get someone from that intermediate level to advanced level. And one of these tactics, or one of these strategies, is dialing in your nutrient timing and your pre-workout nutrition. So when it comes to the research on this, this past year, we just had some new research, including a systematic review and meta-analysis, come out on pre-workout nutrition and its impact on resistance training performance. And the meta-analysis was by King, specifically looking at the role of carbohydrates in pre-training performance. And what this review found was that when it comes to carbohydrates' role in pre-workout nutrition, they matter most for what's called volume performance within resistance training. So they also found that there were certain situations or conditions where someone may benefit more from having carbs pre-workout. So I'll go through some of these conditions or these situations, and this can allow you and the audience to hear and see if these apply to you. And I think a lot of times you're going to realize that many of the things they hit on in terms of these are all situations where carbohydrate pre-training would enhance your performance and benefit you. You'll see that these hit a lot of the viewers or the listeners of this podcast. So the first area where carbohydrates pre-workout will benefit you is if your resistance training sessions last 45 minutes or longer. So that's the vast majority of people probably training about an hour a day or hour a session. It's going to benefit you. Another area that it's going to benefit you, and this goes with what I just covered with training fasted or avoiding training fasted, they found that if you had an overnight fast and are training after waking up, carbohydrates pre-workout are going to have a better benefit for you. Another area or condition is if you're doing a higher amount or higher volume of work. Another condition which is beneficial to have carbs pre-workout is if you're training a larger muscle or a larger group of muscles like your lower body or more muscles during a workout, which is going to increase your energy expenditure. There's going to be a larger benefit from carbohydrates. And what's interesting is they didn't find that there needed to be a massive intake of carbs pre-workout to get these benefits. They found that even doses as low as 0.2 to 0.3 grams per kilogram, meaning for a 200-pound individual, that would be 18 to 27 grams of carbs, were sufficient for improving performance. So even if you're trying to maintain an energy deficit, you're in a dieting phase, and you're trying to drop body fat, you should be able to allocate a percentage of your carbohydrates pre-workout, especially as it can have benefits to your performance. And it's not like it's such a high amount that you need to utilize, like this large bolus, that it's going to throw off your energy balance for the day. So overall, when it comes to pre-workout nutrition and fueling yourself prior to training, this is something I focus on heavily with both myself and my clients over the past decade. And I've seen vast benefits from it, along with tons of positive feedback from clients who have experienced the upsides of properly fueling themselves for their energy demanding training sessions, in terms of improvements in their performance, their strength, their recovery, and how they feel during and after training. So this is something that I definitely suggest. If you guys have not tried this, if you haven't been properly fueling yourselves prior to sessions, take some of this information that we provided you with this week and put it to the test and really see how you feel. Give it a week, give it a period of time where you trial this and you become your own N of one experiment and see if it works for you.
I like that 100%, because that's what I always tell people. You don't know until you try it for yourself. And sometimes you just have to freaking try it for yourself to be able to see if it works.
100%.
But in the case of PERI-WORKOUT nutrition, we're not lying to you. We promise you it actually works. So is there... Well, no, actually, I think that covers it. If you guys have any questions about that, like anything you guys want further, examples of supplements maybe that might benefit that, certain, do we adjust carbohydrates or essential amino acids per client based on body weight? Do we do it on the workouts? Any questions like that, let us know. And we could do like a Q&A over the last couple of episodes to kind of clean some things up before we move into a new educational point. So if you guys are interested in that, feel free to hit us up. But B, what a good one today, man. That was good. Where can everybody find you at, and where can everybody leave you alone at the same time for the following week?
You guys can feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @BrandonDeCruz_ or on my email bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. Generally, I get back to everyone within an hour or so of emailing me. This next week, that will be delayed. However, I look forward to all the feedback from you guys. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, whatever it may be. We really do appreciate your support. And as always, we will be back here in a week because we never miss. So even with me being on vacation, we have rescheduled our session for next week. We'll be recording a little bit later than usual, but our weekly podcast will still go out on Friday afternoon. So you guys never have to worry. Anyway, another great episode, Jeff. Lead us on out, my man.
Dude, well, everyone can find me, Jeff Unbreakable Black, on Instagram. Be sure to interact with me. I think I'm actually kind of unbanned again for a little bit. And then my YouTube channel, Relentless Forever, on YouTube. If you guys are interested, I put a couple of videos up that are just me talk about like the fitness failure loop and things like that. If you guys are just interested to hear me talk, I'm on there and beautiful. And there's some really good videos on there from Jason as well. And I'm looking forward to doing some collab work with Brandon along the way. But that's where y'all can get a hold of me. But with that being said, B, I'll see you next week. Everyone who's listening, do not bother this man. Leave him alone. Let him have a little bit. I promise you there's no emergencies. He'll be back on that email Wednesday. You all just send all your emails Wednesday. You can flood the fuck out of his email box Wednesday. I don't give a shit. But don't be that person. So if you're listening, I'm going to find you. I'm going to hunt you. And I'm going to be like, what the fuck? But anyway, just kidding. Had to have a take-in moment there. Anyway, have yourself a good day, B. Enjoy your trip.
Thank you, my man. Later.